on the chat and the forums. Today is session 4, and we're going to be talking about wallets, which also adds on to the topic of keys and addresses that we explored last week. Wallets are the user interfaces of cryptocurrencies and blockchains. We're going to be talking about how you use them, how they apply their internal functions, and some of the esoteric ways that they work. So let's start, first of all, with a question from Regian Silva. What happens if I have a problem with my wallet or where it is stored? For example, if my computer is stolen or stops working. This is a great question, Regiana. Now, in the old days, in the beginning of this industry, this was a very big problem because you had to store backups of your keys, and these backups would probably be files, which then you have to secure somehow, and every time you created a new address, you'd have to create a new backup. This often led to problems. Now, nowadays we have that problem effectively solved with the technology of hierarchical deterministic wallets. And what hierarchical deterministic wallets do is they start with a seed, and that seed is built from a mnemonic phrase that is usually 12 to 24 English words based on a standard called BIP 39. The mnemonic phrase is converted to a seed based on the BIP 39 standard, and that seed is then used to generate as many keys and addresses as your wallet needs. In fact, it can generate billions of keys in each sub-account, and you can have multiple sub-accounts to separate different functions, let's say personal and business, or your store and your operations account, etc. So your wallet can take that single seed and it can regenerate all of the addresses that it needs and find out how many of those have been previously used, and that then acts as your backup. So it's a 3-step process. A mnemonic phrase of 12 to 24 English words, which produces a seed, which is the basis for producing a series of keys and addresses that your wallet will use. Now, if you lose your computer, if it's stolen, if some problem occurs, then what happens is you take the mnemonic phrase, the 12 to 24 English words, and you import it into another wallet that's compatible. And nowadays, 99% of all the wallets out there are compatible with the BIP 39 standard, and they will take a 12 to 24 word English word or other language words mnemonic phrase and import all of your data. And the way they do this is rather interesting. So if you import restoring a wallet from a backup, whether it's a hardware wallet or a mobile wallet, a desktop wallet, and you use your mnemonic phrase, what the wallet does is it recreates the seed, and then it generates the first key and address in the sequence. From that first key and address, it then goes and interrogates the Bitcoin blockchain or the Ethereum blockchain or any other blockchain that's connected to this mnemonic phrase, depending on what the wallet is, and it asks to see if that address has had any transactions. If it has had transactions to or from it in the past, then that means you've used that address before, so it moves to the next address. It's doing this both for your receiving and your change addresses, which are 2 different paths in the hierarchical deterministic wallet, and it gradually searches through more and more and more addresses, finding all of your previous transactions and re-importing them into the wallet. Until eventually, at some point, it starts finding addresses that have never had any transactions, and this is known as the gap. Now, depending on how the wallet is configured, it will look for a certain number of unused addresses and then assume that you don't use any of the addresses beyond that point and stop checking. That's called the gap limit. Most wallets set that to 20 unused addresses. So if you have 20 unused addresses in a row, somewhere in the sequence of addresses in your wallet, it will assume you haven't gotten that far, you haven't used that many addresses yet, and stop importing there. Now, at that point, you've fully restored your wallet. It's ready to generate the next address in the sequence, the unused address, if you want to receive cryptocurrency. And it can also, if there's balance stored in any of the existing used addresses, it can send that balance by creating a transaction. So effectively, your wallet is right back where it was. All of the transactions, all of the addresses, all generated from the keys, all generated from the seed, all generated from the mnemonic phrase. So it all goes back to that mnemonic phrase. Of course, that means you have to back that up. So that's how it works in the background. Let me quickly check in the chat room, see how you're doing, if you can hear me clearly, and we'll continue with the next question. All right, the next question comes from Giulio Caldarelli. Bitcoin wallets and inheritance, and this is a great question. I've heard of many cases in which crypto was lost due to losing the private keys, accidental death, incapacitation, etc. How can a society built on crypto ensure inheritance? And there's a reply by Ilias which says, by using proper backups and multi-signature wallets. And while that is the technical side of the plan, it may be part of the technical side of the plan, this is a difficult question to answer and requires a much bigger, more thoughtful analysis. Fortunately, there's a book about this written by one of my business colleagues, Pamela Morgan, who is an attorney and educator, and she wrote a book called Crypto Asset Inheritance Planning. The summary of that is that you have to do a combination of a legal plan and a well thought out technical plan that will ensure that you have a will, and that will can be executed because you can access the necessary key material at the time of your incapacitation or death by the appropriate people and not a second before. So this is not simple. You don't just give the backup to a lawyer or write down the password or something like that. You have to go through some rather careful planning. So if you have an amount of cryptocurrency that makes a significant percentage of your net worth, you should really consider doing a proper inheritance planning. And there are workshops and books on how to do that. So using a proper backup, and we talked about the mnemonic phrase and how you store and where you store that, and that's very important. And even more importantly, you have to let some of the people know that you actually have these types of assets. And for that, there is a resource like a letter to loved ones, and you can also find that on Pamela Morgan's website. There's a lot of free resources there. If you want to look into inheritance, it's a very, very good question and not an easy one to solve. Diva asks, recently I decided to create my wallet, and I wonder, apart from buying Bitcoin, how else can I get them? In resources I've read, there are some tasks which you could do for Bitcoin. Is there a reliable and official marketplace for earning Bitcoin or cryptocurrency? Diva, unfortunately, this is a very tricky question because for many of the things you will find online, they are scams, and you need to be very, very, very careful. People will suggest sending you money to your bank account and then giving you Bitcoin, or you send money to their bank account and then they give you Bitcoin, etc., etc. And there's all of these things where they say, okay, just forward this package for me and I'll send you Bitcoin as payment for your task. Almost all of these things you will find are scams, and they work in a variety of different ways, but they basically cheat you out of your money because a lot of bank transactions, cash deposits, checks, etc. are reversible, and crypto isn't. So this is a difficult topic to deal with. I think the best way to do it is to see what skills you have professionally, and what you can offer other people in terms of services and products. So if you make something, you make crafts, you make art pieces, you make servers and desktops, you make whatever, graphic design, then you can sell those things for Bitcoin, whether it's a service or a product, your labor, etc. And you can get paid. I think that's probably the easiest way, earning. The second easiest way is to go to an ATM. Unfortunately, many of the other ways of acquiring cryptocurrency are actually scams, so you have to be very careful. Arwa asks, what is the difference between a mobile wallet and a web wallet that uses a mobile app? If they're similar to each other, why are there two categories? So this is a very, very important question, and the most important aspect of this is understanding who controls the keys. There are some wallets in which you control the keys. And how do you know you control the keys? Well, if the first thing your wallet does when you generate a new wallet is ask you to write down 12 to 24 words as a mnemonic phrase to create a backup, that is your keys. And therefore, you control those keys. They're generated locally on your mobile device. They're not communicated to any type of server. They're not stored by someone else, like an exchange or service. You have them on your own mobile device, and you have to back them up. And if you don't back them up properly, no one can help you if your device is lost or you forget your PIN or something else happens. So control over keys is critical in cryptocurrency. I have a slogan that I use to express that called "Not your keys, not your coins." Remember, your keys, your coins is the fundamental principle of control and ownership in the decentralized cryptocurrency economy. So the real category isn't mobile versus web, it's where the keys are stored. If the keys are stored on a remote service, even if they are encrypted by your own password and that remote service doesn't have control of them, there's a very big risk that they can be phished by redirecting you to a fake copy of that website, persuading you to put in your keys, and then or put in your password and then stealing your money. Which is why a mobile wallet that generates the keys locally, where you can restore and back up your own mnemonic phrase, is the most secure option. Of course, if you do generate a backup of your mnemonic phrase, you must remember to never ever enter that mnemonic phrase into any application you're not sure is a properly constructed, popular, secure, well-reviewed mobile wallet that keeps the keys locally on your device. You don't enter them into websites, you don't enter them into test sites, you don't enter that mnemonic phrase into an online document, you don't take a screenshot of it, you don't put it on Google Drive or Dropbox. You write it down with pen and paper, and you store it as a physical copy in a secure location, like a locked drawer or a small fireproof safe or some other thing like that. Web wallets in general mean that somebody else has custody of your keys. They should be avoided as much as possible. Exchanges almost always are custodial, and they keep control of your funds and the keys that control those funds, and therefore you should never leave money on an exchange. If it's sitting on the exchange, it's not your money. It is a promise from the exchange, and you shouldn't just leave it there. When I use an exchange, I will move crypto onto the exchange or fiat onto the exchange, do a trade, sale, buy, whatever. Within 15 minutes, I will then move that money out. So if I'm selling crypto, I move crypto in, sell it, convert it to fiat, and move the fiat out into my own bank account. If I'm buying crypto, I move fiat in, I exchange it for crypto, and I move the crypto out. And for those 15 minutes, I am sitting like this going, please don't get hacked now, please don't crash now, please don't do an exit scam now, give me my 15 minutes so I can get my money out. there's always that risk of a third-party custodial service. You can minimize that risk as much as possible by doing small trades and never leaving a balance. Exchanges are not wallets. They're not safe unless you are unable to maintain your own keys and maintain your own security. Maybe your parents, for example, the only way they can use crypto is through a custodial exchange. It's not a good model. And you should try to encourage people to use a hardware wallet and to learn how to do backups of the mnemonic phrases themselves. Damianos asks, how can I set up my own wallet without providing any identity? That's a great question, Damianos. I can make a number of suggestions. I do not endorse any of these wallets, but I know other people have used them in the past and they like them. There are a number of different wallets that you can use. What you're looking for is a wallet that generates a secure mnemonic phrase locally on your own device where that phrase doesn't leave. The best way to do this is to purchase a hardware wallet. If you are not yet involved in crypto enough to have the funds to purchase a hardware wallet, I would recommend the second best option is to download a wallet onto your smartphone, because your smartphone is probably the device that is the most secure device you have. Modern smartphone operating systems are extremely secure if you keep up with the updates, have set a PIN, and are careful about what applications you download. They're extremely secure, more secure than a laptop or desktop device. So if you have an Apple phone, for example, you can go online and review all of the wallets that are available in the App Store, the Apple iTunes App Store, and you can find the correct wallet for your needs. I'm not an Apple user, so I'm not sure which wallets are the most popular today on Apple. I believe one of them is BRD, which I know uses BIP39 mnemonic phrases. I know there are others, but I'm not quite sure because I don't use them. On my Android device, I have a whole set of different wallets. I use wallets like Mycelium, Samurai, and a number of others, Green Address, which has multi-sig capabilities. And these wallets are well-built, secure, well-reviewed, used for many years, and they generate the keys on your device, and therefore you are in control of your funds. Those are good ways to start. None of these require you to put in your identity. On your desktop, you could download a wallet like the Electrum wallet or the Wasabi wallet, for example, and those are also good choices that you can apply that give you a degree of control over your funds. However, it is much more difficult to secure a desktop wallet. I recommend when you use desktop wallets, you only use them in conjunction with a hardware wallet where the keys are actually generated and stored on the hardware wallet and not on the generic operating system. Most desktop operating systems are not secure enough. Most desktops and laptops are not secure enough to hold crypto funds. Let's check into the chat room and see how things are going. Oh, there was a quick follow-up from Bitcoin Boy who mentioned that Open Bazaar is a legitimate place to sell items for crypto. That is correct, yes. I have used Open Bazaar in the past. I don't use it at the moment because I have other issues going on, but I have used it in the past, and it is an effective way to sell things, both physical things like crafts and socks and keychains and things like that, as well as virtual things like booklets and PDFs and music and things like that that you can sell as digital files, and that will allow you to get some crypto. Okay, moving on. Vincent asks, I have some difficulty visualizing how the public and private key pair is stored in or by a wallet. How is it done technically? In a full client wallet, for example, cannot a private key that is stored there be hacked? Yes, Vincent. First of all, in most of modern wallets, as I said, what is actually stored is not a private public key, but instead the mnemonic phrase. Now, often a mnemonic phrase is protected by an additional passphrase and an additional PIN, and that makes it much more secure. I recommend using a passphrase, especially on a hardware wallet, and of course setting up a PIN. In these cases, both on a smartphone and on a hardware wallet, what happens is the software that's running on these devices has certain capabilities to store private information into an area of memory that is somewhat protected. And the degree of protection varies. There are some specialized security chips, for example, such as the secure element that's used on Apple phones, as well as the equivalent on Android, on the Android operating system on most modern phones, whereby an application that is using that device can store cryptographic material inside a special area of memory that cannot be accessed by other applications, or that requires additional authentication, such as PIN or biometric. And this secure element is protected from all of the other applications on the device, including the operating system, and is encrypted so that it can't be accessed when the device is booted up. That's how keys are stored on these kinds of devices. Some hardware wallets have the equivalent of a secure element made by a variety of chip manufacturers. Some don't have a secure element, have various other techniques for protecting the information that is on the device itself. And these are varying degrees of security, but in general, any such specialized hardware wallet or a well-designed application that uses a secure element of a smartphone is secure. When you go to a laptop or desktop, however, because of the variety of hardware that a generic operating system has to use, it is often the case that there is no secure storage capability on the device. So what happens then is that the wallet that's operating on your laptop or desktop keeps the information encrypted, and when you try to access it, it will require password, passphrase, or PIN that it will use to decrypt the information that's on the hard drive. Of course, once it's decrypted, it's then sitting in the application memory, which, if the operating system is correctly configured, should be protected from other applications. However, if your operating system has been compromised, and that's a lot easier to do with a generic operating system such as the Apple operating system that runs on Mac computers, or the Windows operating system, or even generic versions of Linux such as Ubuntu. In that case, if your device has been compromised and someone has been able to take over root access or administrator access on that device, then they can use the operating system to see the data stored by an application when it's in memory, and therefore they can compromise and extract your mnemonic phrase, which means you now have a big problem. Mnemonic phrases should use passphrases for extra security, but it's very difficult to secure on a laptop or desktop operating system, which is why I recommend using a hardware wallet or a smartphone device. They're more secure in terms of the hardware compatibility. All right, Lewis asks, question 1, are paper wallets secure? Well, let me be as clear as possible. No. There you go. Paper wallets are not secure. The reason paper wallets are not secure is not because of the paper wallet itself, but because of the entire operating environment that that paper wallet has to be constructed and used in, and the technical expertise of the user and the inability of most users to secure that operating environment. Now, a lot of people argue with me about that position, and I often get a lot of pushback, but I'm going to say it once more. Paper wallets are not secure because there are better ways of doing the same thing. So if you use a mnemonic phrase, which is effectively the same kind of backup mechanism as a paper wallet, in combination with a hardware wallet, which is a secure operating environment for generating, signing, and restoring, backing up that mnemonic phrase, you have a much more secure solution, a much more flexible solution because it does multiple currencies, a much more private solution because it doesn't do address reuse and can generate hierarchical deterministic wallets, and a much more standardized solution because it can be imported in a variety of different wallets if need be. So mnemonic phrases under BIP39 standard, plus a passphrase, plus a PIN, a hardware wallet, are actually the modern version of a paper wallet, and have made paper wallets obsolete because they solve many of the fundamental security and operational challenges of paper wallets. A simple paper wallet, the disadvantage is not the paper wallet or how you encrypt it. The disadvantage of a paper wallet is that to generate it, you need a trusted operating system, trusted hardware, and a trusted printer. That all has been solved with the introduction of hardware wallets. If you think you can secure an operating system and a printer and install software to generate a paper wallet, what you are in fact doing is you're recreating the security of a hardware wallet, but on a much less suitable operating system, because that operating system is much bigger and has many, many more non-specialized functions, all of which become vulnerabilities and weaknesses. So verifying the security of that environment is almost impossible. All of the things that you might be concerned about with hardware wallets as to, can you trust the manufacturer, can you trust the hardware, can you trust the software, are multiplied by 2 orders of magnitude when you try to do that on a generic piece of hardware, such as an Intel or AMD laptop, running a generic operating system such as Windows, Apple, or Linux, and trying then to install generic software and libraries on top of that in order to operate a paper wallet. All of those problems become much, much bigger when you try to do it yourself. Don't try to do it yourself. Use a hardware wallet, follow the instructions, don't try to deviate and do smart things. Simply take a hardware wallet, generate a mnemonic phrase, write that mnemonic phrase down on paper, store that paper in 1 or 2 copies somewhere securely, operate the hardware wallet according to the specifications. If you're really concerned about your physical security, add a passphrase and make a separate backup of that. That is the most secure solution. Do not use paper wallets anymore. They're not good solutions for crypto storage, in my opinion, unless you're an expert. And if you're an expert, you wouldn't be asking this question. You know exactly what the trade-offs are between hardware wallets and paper wallets. This is not about finding the one expert who can successfully execute paper wallets. This is about the 99.99% of people out there who cannot and should therefore use a hardware wallet. The next question, also from Luis, is non-deterministic versus deterministic wallets. What are the differences between these two kinds of wallet technologies? When is it recommended to use one of them, or is one of them obsolete? A non-deterministic wallet is exactly what you just described, which is a paper wallet where you have a single private key and a single corresponding address. If you want another private key and another address, you just generate another private key from randomness, which means that the 2 private keys you've now generated are not related in any way and have to be backed up individually. If you need a third one, you have to generate another one, again randomly. So you can't really do some of the fundamental security and privacy principles in crypto, such as do not reuse addresses. How can you not reuse addresses when every address you generate is completely random because the key is random, and as a result has to be backed up on its own separately from every other key and address you've generated? If you generate 100 keys and 100 addresses, now you have to create 100 backups. And you can't forget to back up one of your keys because someone may send money to an address that you used in the past. That happens all the time. Non-deterministic wallets, where each key is randomly generated separately, are obsolete and should not be used. They can only be used for one currency, they can only be used one time, they're difficult to use, they're difficult to back up, and they're prone to loss of funds because of accidents. Deterministic wallets, specifically hierarchical deterministic wallets that generate a sequence of keys in the shape of a tree with multiple paths that can support multiple cryptocurrencies off a single mnemonic phrase, multiple accounts off a single mnemonic phrase for every cryptocurrency, and billions of separate keys, all of which can be recreated in full from that mnemonic phrase, are the standard of best practice for today and is what should be used. Non-deterministic wallets are now obsolete, and paper wallets are non-deterministic wallets and are now obsolete. Prosper asks, should we trust hardware wallet manufacturers? And can't they load codes onto the chip during production so they can be able to access our private keys and hence our funds when we start using the devices? Yes, they can. And no, you should not trust hardware wallet manufacturers unless you have some level of trust in the fact that many other people have also trusted that. Hardware wallet manufacturers are a trusted third party, meaning that in order to use a hardware wallet, you are putting a degree of trust into the hardware wallet manufacturer. That means that theoretically they could load software on there that either generates mnemonic phrases that are somewhat compromised, where the randomness isn't really random, so they can predict what keys you're going to use and therefore steal your money, or they could run software on there that extracts information from the wallet and using another side channel, for example, transmits that to someone for nefarious purposes so they can steal your money. So that's a weakness. However, keep in mind that these hardware wallets are very heavily scrutinized. The software on them is very heavily scrutinized. Dozens and dozens of security experts not only review the code, but they try to break these devices, especially the most popular ones. And there's probably 2 or 3 very popular ones, such as the Ledger hardware wallet, the Trezor hardware wallet, and the KeepKey hardware wallet, to name probably the 3 most popular. These 3 devices are very heavily scrutinized by a number of security experts, and they constantly try to break them. There's even a conference called Breaking Bitcoin where they present their latest tricks for breaking these hardware wallets. Now, if all of the things I've said up to now make you think, oh, I should probably not use these, you would be wrong. You absolutely should use hardware wallets because all of the problems I just described exist for every other type of hardware that you might use to generate or sign transactions. So if you're generating keys or signing transactions on a laptop, how can you trust all of the thousands of software developers and software packages that are installed on your laptop and all of the dozens of hardware manufacturers that have introduced code and hardware into that laptop? So you just describe a problem that is much bigger on a laptop, much bigger on a smartphone than it is on a highly specialized, highly limited, purpose-specific hardware wallet. The reason you trust the hardware wallet manufacturers is not because they are better people. The reason you can trust the hardware wallet itself is because it is a highly limited, very specific function device with very limited software on it, very limited hardware on it, and every choice made in that hardware wallet is heavily scrutinized by a number of security professionals. So you trust that process as a whole. You trust the ecosystem. You trust the community of security developers, not just the hardware wallet manufacturers. And it's because there are no other better alternatives. So if you then decide to try and do your own thing with a paper wallet, you will lose your money. And it is a much less secure approach. If you decide to use something on your laptop, it's much less secure than a hardware wallet. The only people who can really have the choice to not trust a hardware wallet manufacturer are the security experts themselves, who can do things like generate their own mnemonic phrases by generating entropy using things like dice and pencils and papers and old-style dumb calculators. If you can do that, congratulations. There's probably only less than 100 people in the world who can do that with crypto today. And that's not what we're talking about here. So do you trust the hardware wallet manufacturers? No. You use hardware wallets anyway because you trust an entire ecosystem and an entire process around that ecosystem. You should still be very, very careful about where you buy your hardware wallet, and make sure you source it from a trusted distributor, preferably from the manufacturer themselves directly. And you should always generate your own keys. If you receive a hardware wallet that already has a mnemonic phrase generated, you've just been scammed, and you should wipe that or even throw it away, because that's not a trusted device. However, properly used, properly sourced hardware wallets are the most secure option we have for the vast, vast majority of users today in the crypto space. All right, quick check in the chat room. And then we'll go back and continue with the rest of the questions as you hear me now talking well after you saw me checking in the chat room. Fantastic. I hear everything's good. Let's move right on. Lewis asks, transaction validation and script construction. I would like to learn more about transaction validation and the two types of scripts to validate transactions, a locking script and an unlocking script. And how do these operate in transactions? Paul also wants to learn more about this, so let me go into that for just a tiny bit. Now, we talked about Bitcoin addresses, and in the past we've talked about addresses in general. We talked about how the address represents the double hash of the public key. Now, when you tell your wallet, send crypto to this address, your wallet in the background constructs a transaction, and in that transaction it puts a special script. I'll talk about Bitcoin specifically. Other cryptocurrencies may use slight variations on this general idea, but often it's a similar type of approach. So in the case of Bitcoin, when you say send Bitcoin to the address 1 blah 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 blah, and it's a one address, a traditional double hash of a public key address, what your wallet does is it constructs a transaction that has an output with a locking script in it. And what the locking script is a script in the Bitcoin scripting language that says, check that whoever tries to redeem this presents a public key that, when double hashed, matches this address that I'm trying to send money to, and a signature that can be validated against the public key we just double hashed. That script, which is take the public key, double hash it, check against the Bitcoin address, and then validate the signature, is called a pay to public key hash script. It's a classic script that you'll see. It's the first lesson you see when you learn about scripting in the Bitcoin scripting language, and that is the locking script. So when you create a transaction that says pay one Bob as an address, and it's a one address, your wallet actually creates a transaction that says, I'm locking this amount of Bitcoin to the paid to public key hash locking script that will match this address. And that's the locking script. Now that money has been locked against that locking script. If the recipient of that, the person who owns that address, wants to spend it, they have to present an unlocking script that, when combined with the locking script, unlocks the amount. And that unlocking script is a public key that they own and a signature that they can generate with their private key. And since they're the only ones who have the private key, only they can produce this unlocking script. Now, when you take the unlocking script of public key and signature and you match it against the locking script of public key double hash Bitcoin address check signature, and you put them together, it takes the public key that's unlocking, it double hashes it, checks it against the Bitcoin address, and if it matches, it will then check that the signature also matches that public key for that transaction. And that means that together the locking and unlocking script allow you to send money by locking it to someone who can show ownership of a Bitcoin address, and the person who owns the corresponding private key is the only person who can construct the unlocking script that fits that lock in order to release that money in their own transaction to pay someone else. And so each time a transaction happens, it is a sequence of unlock this, unlock this, unlock this, and then lock it here, lock it here, lock it here. The simplest transaction is one input, unlock this amount, one output, lock it to a different script. And these get chained together, where each unlocking script refers to a previous locking script, and each future locking script can only be unlocked by another unlocking script that locks amounts to another locking script, etc., etc. So bits of Bitcoin are basically getting locked and unlocked and locked and unlocked in each sequence of transactions as they change ownership, or as the value is moved from one Bitcoin address to another. I say moved within quotes, and I say send within quotes, because of course Bitcoin is never transmitted, it never moves. It's locked to one locking script, and then it's unlocked and locked to another locking script. The Bitcoin hasn't moved. All that's changed is the effective control of that Bitcoin by changing the locking script and the conditions on which this amount can be spent. So that's the process of what's happening behind the scenes, and we're going to talk about that with a bit more detail in future lessons. Ryan asks, given the race by both users with fees and miners with hashing, is it possible that some wallets secretly working with certain pools can send transactions directly to the mempool of those mining pools first, or a few seconds before everybody else, and give them a slight edge to build an ideal block or create higher fees? Yes. This is in fact possible, not just possible, it has happened. There are times in the network where miners have created their own transactions with elevated fees, injected them into the mempool of various mining pools that they're well connected to, where they get propagated very, very fast, causing the mempool to have lots of high fee transactions, and then that causes all of the other users who want to put in transactions to elevate their fees. Now, this is a strategy that is very risky. If a miner that is constructing these in collaboration with some wallet that they've built to do this, to jam high fee transactions into the mempool in order to elevate the prices, if that miner isn't actually mining those transactions, effectively they're spending these fees and paying the other miner that ended up mining these transactions. So this strategy only works for miners who have a very high percentage of the hash rate, so they can recoup some of the fees they're spending trying to jam the market. Of course, if all miners are doing this, and they do this kind of collusion, then what happens is that fees can be elevated. However, keep in mind, from a game theory perspective, if you're one of the miners and you notice all of your colleagues are jamming transaction with high fees into the mempool to drive up fees, what you can do is sit back, not pay a thing, and let them drive up fees while you just earn them by mining, and you're not risking these transactions that might be mined by someone else, which means that you make as much money as they make per your hashing power from the higher fees, but you're not spending money to create these higher fees. Well, if you think about it, if everybody does that, then nobody is willing to take the risk of creating the high fee transactions because those would benefit all of the other miners and they'd be taking on all of the costs. It's a classic tragedy of the commons scenario, and in this particular case, it works to the benefit of users because this only works if there's a lot of collusion between a lot of miners who have a lot of hash power during a time when fees are already high and there's some kind of political fight going on, which is why this happened mostly in the summer preceding the hard fork of Bitcoin Cash and the huge debate over scaling, where people wanted to make a point about how full the system was. Now, it may happen from time to time again, but it's a risky strategy for miners that they can only pull off when there's a lot of collusion, and where miners can easily reap all the benefit and pay none of the costs by taking advantage of that. So it's a losing strategy most of the time. All right, let me take a quick break and drink something before my voice stops working. And this is the last question in the wallet section, and a really good question as such. How can you create an offline address, and then how does the Bitcoin network know about this address if you've never been online? How will the Bitcoin network find out about this address? And this is really interesting because it speaks to a fundamental aspect of the system, meaning that addresses are just numbers. You could pick one out of randomness. You generate a key, of course, not an address directly. You generate a key out of randomness, just picking a number at random from a huge range of numbers, and that produces a unique Bitcoin address. Unique not because you check that nobody else has it, unique because the chance of someone else has it is about the same as winning 1 million lotteries in a row. So the bottom line is that's how you create these keys and addresses. Now, you've created the address, the network doesn't know. The beauty is the network doesn't need to know. That address doesn't exist until someone tries to send money to it. And when someone tries to send money to it, then it becomes part of the Bitcoin network. So let's say you generated an address offline. And in fact, you don't even need a computer to do that. You could use dice, playing cards, a coin. Flip a coin 256 times, write down the 0, 1, tails, and heads numbers, produce a 256-bit private key. Then go through the laborious manual exercise of converting that private key into a public key with elliptic curve multiplication. It's very difficult to do, but you can do it with pen and paper. And then go through the even more laborious process of doing SHA-256 on paper and RIPE-MD on paper, and you could produce a Bitcoin address. Not only one that hasn't been online, one that has never seen a computer. It's just a number. You just did a series of calculations. And now you have a Bitcoin address. Great. Well, you could then give that Bitcoin address to someone and say, send money to it. And they could type it into their wallet, Or if you're really adventurous, you sit down and you draw a QR code by hand. That is also possible. And they scan it. But let's say you're not that adventurous. You just give them the Bitcoin address. They type it into their wallet. They construct a transaction. That transaction will consist of sending or spending an amount from their own Bitcoin funds to your Bitcoin address that has never been seen before. Specifically, actually what it's doing is it's constructing a locking script that says, upon presentation of a public key that when double hashed is equal to this Bitcoin address and a digital signature that matches this public key against this specific transaction message, you may release these funds. And so that transaction is recorded on the Bitcoin blockchain and it just sits there. If nobody claims it, maybe that Bitcoin address was generated in a weird way and doesn't even have a corresponding key. That's called a burn address. It doesn't need to be a real Bitcoin address. Of course, if you lock funds to an incorrect or fake Bitcoin address, then those funds effectively become locked forever because there is no unlocking script that can release them. However, in the scenario we just discussed, you actually wrote down in binary a private key that you constructed by flipping coins or whatever. And that private key was the basis of the Bitcoin address you gave your friend. So you actually have the ability to construct an unlocking script. So then you could either import that private key into a wallet and spend the money that your friend sent you, or you could even construct a transaction by hand that says, here's an unlocking script, here's the public key, here's the digital signature, please spend this money. And if you transmit that transaction to the Bitcoin network, it will match the unlocking script to the Bitcoin address you produced earlier. It will say that means you are the correct owner. It will be a valid transaction and you will spend the money. The Bitcoin network doesn't need to know about addresses because addresses effectively are just locking scripts. And if you decide to lock something or an amount to a locking script that is invalid or doesn't correspond to an address anybody's seen or even corresponds to an address for which there is no key, what you've effectively done is you've buried treasure without a map. You've locked a lock without a key, and that money is gone forever. It can never be retrieved because there is no valid transaction that can unlock it. But if you do have a valid key behind that, the Bitcoin network doesn't care. It will sit there with the locking script. That amount will sit there locked up until you present the unlocking script that allows you to spend it. And until then, the Bitcoin network doesn't care. It just sits there. Which also has another interesting implication. How many Bitcoin are sitting there with locking scripts that cannot be unlocked, or for which the keys have been lost, or for which there are no keys? The answer is, in many cases, we don't know. Some are obvious. There are some addresses and locking scripts on the Bitcoin network today that have locked funds that we know mathematically can never be unlocked. Those Bitcoin are lost forever. There are some that are locked to addresses where the keys have been lost, and we don't know that they've been lost because it's impossible to tell. There will never be an unlocking script because there is no private key, or until at least a quantum computer can produce a private key by reverse engineering that address, and even that is very tenable for the next several decades. All right, that completes our wallet conversation. I'm going to look at a couple of the questions that we had from previous sessions and see if there's something that might be worth talking about in this particular session. No, I think we've actually covered everything. A lot of the questions we covered indirectly by answering related questions that clarified these issues. I could go through them very, very quickly though, just to make sure everybody understands. Diva asks, could Bitcoin be a standard for other cryptocurrencies as once gold was for money? The answer is yes. Bitcoin is already, in effect, the reserve currency for all other cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin has the largest amount of liquidity. It's the first cryptocurrency that is traded on the vast majority of exchanges. It has the most exchanges and trading pairs against fiat currencies and other cryptocurrencies. And it has the largest market capitalization, which therefore makes it, by default, the reserve currency of the Internet of Money. It's already happened. That's exactly what's happened. Will it stay like that? We don't know. But right now, Bitcoin is the reserve currency of the Internet of Money. Dietmar asks, I'm afraid we are still distant from significant adoption of cryptocurrencies. Every time we spend fiat, we reinforce the system. How could we speed up adoption of crypto payments? Well, earn and spend crypto directly. The question has already been answered by yourself. You got it. Every time we spend fiat, we reinforce the system. Spend less fiat, spend more crypto. Earn less fiat, earn more crypto. Shift more of your economic activity into the crypto economy. Now, I understand this is very difficult for people to do. It's a chicken and egg problem. In order to earn, you have to find someone who wants to spend. In order to spend, you have to find someone who wants to sell you something for crypto. And this is difficult when you're bootstrapping. However, there are many opportunities in niche environments. For example, cross-border transactions where you're paying subcontractors, or various non-geographic professions like web design and graphic design and web development and programming and translation work, etc. All of those are services that I have purchased already with crypto in other countries, and they're a great way to spend crypto for me, but they're also a great way for these people to earn crypto through their professional skills. George asks, the BTC hash rate dropped 36% between the 23rd and 24th of September. How do you interpret this drop, and which can be the reasons behind it? Well, first of all, it's actually very difficult to measure the hash rate over short periods of time. Some of these drops may be due to widespread electrical problems in a region where there are a lot of miners. Some could be due to various other geopolitical reasons and things like that. In this particular case, I think we found out shortly thereafter that a warehouse with over $100 million worth of equipment burned down, and as a result, that hash power went offline. It was quickly replaced, and most of that recovered almost immediately because the rate of growth exceeds that quite substantially. So I think that might be one explanation. But one of the beauties of having anonymous miners that we don't know where they are and who they are is that when you observe these things from the outside, it's difficult to pinpoint the exact cause. That actually means the counter to that, of course, is that if you don't know who the miners are, you can't coerce them, or governments can't coerce them to make them do something or not do something. So that's an advantage. These two kind of balance each other out. Ryan asks, after reading this week's coursework, I was interested in checking out the Blockchain Explorer on blockchain.com. I saw a mining pool named F2 Pool quite often, and I noticed that on October 3rd, 2019, they mined 18 blocks. Is it fair to assume then that this pool alone potentially made a gross profit of $1.8 million in one day, not including transaction fees? What are the economics of these pools? How much of that 1.8 million is potentially profit? Well, it depends. It depends on the electricity cost, operational cost, and hardware cost of the miners who are participating. Now, keep in mind, and this is really, really important, mining pools are not miners. Miners are the people with the hardware. Mining pools are the coordinators who help the miners collaborate so they can smooth out their earnings. So it's not the mining pool that mines these things. It's actually the miners who participate in that pool who mined these blocks. And how much of that 1.8 million was profit? We don't know. The profit ranges between 0 in many cases. Some of these are not profitable. And in some cases up to 30% or more when the cost of electricity is low, the price of Bitcoin is high, the hash rate of a specific miner is high, and they're able to get lots and lots of blocks, and even more so when the transaction fees are high. So the profit margin depends on all of these factors, which are highly, highly individualized. Different miners have different profit margins and operating costs, which actually is a great way for the system to dynamically balance. I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you for participating in the 4th session of the massive open online course for the University of Nicosia's master's degree in digital currencies. I'm Andreas Antonopoulos. It's been an absolute pleasure. Some really great questions today. I'm so excited to be answering them. Thank you so much, not only for asking these great questions, but for phrasing them accurately and participating in the conversation in the forums. I saw many people added comments and suggestions with these questions. Keep it up, keep studying, send more questions, and I'll see you next week for session 5. Thank you so much. Have a good one.